Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of the 2021 NC ArcGIS Users Group Conference. Our sessions today are running from 8:30 until 1 o'clock. And at the close of today's sessions, we will give away door prizes, which you must be present to win. So stick around until the end today, because there are some really great prizes. Also, be sure to check out the NCAUG merch on the conference page. All the proceeds from that go to scholarship funds. And all of our sessions today and throughout the conference are being recorded, and they will be available on the NCAUG YouTube page after the conference with a bit of a delay, so please be patient there. Again, welcome and thank you for attending the Constructing the 2021 North Carolina Political Areas Dataset session. Our speaker today is Alan Coates. Alan is a GIS analyst with the North Carolina Division of Emergency Management. He joined NCEM in January and has worked with GIS for several years to respond to wildfires and hurricanes, to understand flooding impacts on transportation infrastructure, protect water quality during forestry operations, as well as to create story maps and web apps for the general public. So if you have any questions for Alan during today's presentation, we encourage you to enter your questions in the chat and he will answer them during the session or at the end of the presentation. For continuing education credit, please make sure your name on your Zoom login is correct. And finally, we will have a quick exit poll for you at the end of the session. So if you don't mind doing that on your way out, I believe it's just one question. With that, I will turn it over to you, Alan. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Coates. Like Andrew said, I work for North Carolina Emergency Management in the risk management section. I've been with NCEM since January of this year. I'm a GIS analyst, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2021 North Carolina Political Areas Dataset. This is a project that has been one of my main tasks since I first took this job. So during the presentation, I'll just give an overview of the contents of the data set and explain how I put it together. So what we have put together is a single statewide data set containing up-to-date political boundaries. For many years, from what I understand, this kind of data set was not available. No one had put anything like it together. People for many years might be using data that they had downloaded over time, or they might have a good grasp on what was available in the nearby counties. Some people would use data from the DOT PAL bill. However, not all municipalities tend to participate in that, so it was considered lacking in some areas. But in summary, there was a lot of data all over the place coming from different sources, and those data were not always up to date. So you had these data mismatches at every level. So the first version of this statewide data set was created originally back in 2012 and updated in 2014, but it hasn't been updated and, it has not been updated and re-released since that time. So when I came into this position, I took on the task of updating it for 2021. The data set contains some basic components. First of all, the municipality boundaries. So that includes towns, cities, villages. I think there are also a couple of townships included in there. Of course, the county boundaries for all 100 counties in North Carolina. The extraterritorial jurisdictions, all of the military installations, and all of the official tribal holdings within the state. I wanted to give a bit more information on one component that seems to be a topic of interest for people. So many people have not heard about these, but others are keenly aware of them. And before I started the project, I myself had never heard of them. These are the extraterritorial jurisdictions, or ETJs for short. And much of the information that I'm including here is taken from a document titled Extraterritorial Jurisdictions for Planning and Development Regulation, that was written by David Owens, who is a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. So it's an excellent resource that I highly recommend if you want to learn more about ETJs. Quite a bit of useful information there. ETJs represent existing or projected urban development in areas of critical concern to the city, as evidenced by officially adopted plans for its development. And that's language that's taken directly from the general statute that relates to these boundaries. And according to a UNC survey in 2018, 66% of cities within the state exercise some kind of ETJ. These boundaries usually follow the property lines, but not always. So the legal guidelines for ETJs are stipulated in North Carolina General Statutes chapters 160A and 160D. The general statute stipulates that the ETJ must be set by an ordinance adopted by the city governing board. And as soon as that ordinance passes, the city acquires jurisdiction for all of its ordinances in those areas, and the county loses its jurisdiction. So this includes zoning, subdivisions, housing and building codes, erosion and sedimentation control responsibility, and many other regulations. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the General Assembly can have some oversight over this process. So here's a simple map I made to show you what ETJs often look like. This is near the intersection of Duplin County, Sampson County, and Wayne County. So we have the town limits in yellow, surrounded by the ETJs in green. And these ETJs may be fairly uniform, such as the ones surrounding Calypso, or they may be more specifically defined. And as you can see, ETJs may extend into adjacent counties. So simply because ETJ begins in one county and the town limit itself is located entirely in one county, the ETJ may extend into another county as well. Here's an overview of the basic process I used to construct the data set. I started by acquiring the data, and then I compiled the data. I then followed up by fixing the errors and verifying all of the attributes. And since I finished that, I've just been cleaning up, making some quality control checks to the data. So, I've been working on this since March, and I found it was a draft a couple of weeks ago in August. Normally, I don't think it would take that amount of time to revamp the data set like this. But there were other projects that came up that required my attention. So I had to put this on the back burner periodically and then come back to it and work on it some more. I've acquired data from a number of different sources, but the most common source was the GIS site for each county. Almost every county has some kind of web map that contains their basic GIS layers. People sometimes use these to examine parcel boundaries. But as I was working through the data, if there seemed to be a discrepancy or some kind of confusion on my end, I tried to reach out to the county GIS staff to clear that up. And I haven't contacted every single county, but I did try to reach out to many of them. And everyone that I worked with over email, usually, everyone I worked with was very gracious and helpful. So if anyone that I spoke to is attending, I just want to take this moment to thank you for helping me put this together and helping me understand the situation in your particular area. I also noticed that a number of counties have created these open data sites through Esri. There were probably 20 to 30 counties that had an open data site like this. And I found these sites to be fairly easy to find and easy to use. So I enjoyed using these. But there were some counties that also had FTP sites that hosted downloadable data, and that was perfectly fine as well. There were some situations where I would visit the county GIS site and they would have data to download right there on their county website, and that worked just fine as well. I wanted to explain briefly how I decided to include or exclude data. I created a sort of hierarchy that is listed here. I started by using the county boundary shapefile from the North Carolina Geodetic Survey. These county boundaries really formed the foundation of the data set. They were considered the highest authority in many situations. And then on top of those county boundaries, I placed municipality limits that were mostly acquired from the counties and municipalities. So in many cases, I could simply download fairly recent data from the county sites. And so I simply plugged that into the data set on top of the county boundaries. If that was not available, if there was no data to download, I referred to the web maps that the counties provided. And if that wasn't available, so I tried to refer to the web maps that the counties provided. And then I would try to find a match for what was shown there in the web map. So in the best cases, I could simply use archived data, maybe from that 2014 data set, if there weren't any changes during that time frame. Sometimes I use the PAL bill or census place data because those happen to be the best match. There were a few cases, very rare cases, where I had to sort of hand draw the data to match what was shown in the web map. So I would edit the existing feature to match that using the tools in ArcGIS Pro and the parcel boundaries or other guides. Now, cities and towns were considered superior to ETJs. If a town overlapped an ETJ, then the ETJ was clipped so that the town took precedence. So in any conflict between a town and an ETJ, the town was considered superior. And then I also used the list of municipalities from the North Carolina League of Municipalities to verify what should be included. They have a list of all the incorporated municipalities within the state. I also used tribal boundary data and military installations, but there usually were not any conflicts with those boundaries against municipalities. So the final data set has more than 2,300 individual polygons. Some of these are dissolved into multi-part polygons, so one polygon showing multiple separated areas. And I did that because they didn't come with any information about the individual parts. However, where that information was included in the data from the county, I tried to incorporate that into the final data set and keep the parts separated. So that could include deed book details, the name of the person who created that polygon, or the last date that someone edited it, for example. There were several times where the county had included the ordinance that related to a specific annexation. So I tried to include all of that information and keep those polygons separate in the final data set. So more than 2,000 of those individual polygons came directly from the counties and municipalities. Exactly 100 came from the North Carolina Geodetic Survey because they have, of course, defined the county boundaries. So that represents 100 counties. And then a small portion of the data set came from other sources, such as the 2014 data set, the PAL bill data, the census, etc. Now, as I was putting this together, I tried to verify if there were any ETJs that might have been added or removed. So for example, we have this map here in the middle. Since the 2014 data set was released, the ETJ surrounding the town of Boone has been removed. From what I understand, this was a somewhat prominent news topic in North Carolina during late 2014, 2015, maybe 2016. But to give a very basic overview, the General Assembly passed a bill revoking the town's ETJ. The town then challenged that in state court, and ultimately the state Supreme Court upheld the General Assembly's law, and the ETJ has been removed. Therefore, I have not included the Boone ETJ in this data set, along with several other ETJs across the state. But I've also added ETJs where they seem to be officially added since 2014. Sorry for the skips ahead. I'm not sure why it keeps doing that, but try to work with it. So again, as I was working through these data, looking at each ETJ, I tried to do some research as to whether a particular ETJ was official or simply a study area placed on the web map. And I say that because a few of the counties that I talked to said that no, that ETJ is not official. It was never officially enacted through an ordinance. It was just a study area or something experimental that we place on the web map. So there's no need to officially include it in the data set. So I try to use that kind of feedback from the counties as they reply to my emails. So one big part of putting all of this together involved removing topology errors. So after I had compiled all of the data, I applied 2 topology rules to the data set. 1, the features must not overlap each other, and 2, there could not be any gaps between features. So these rules are meant to reflect the reality that, first of all, we can't be in 2 places at the same time, so the features should not overlap. But on the other hand, we have to be somewhere. So that deals with the gaps. At the most basic level, with respect to this data set, one is simply within the boundaries of a county. So if you're not in city limits or an ETJ or a military installation, you're simply in Nash County, for example. So this map on this slide shows all of the topology errors or places where the data broke these rules. I believe when I got started, there were more than 7,000 individual errors. So as you can imagine, it took some time to go through and correct all of those errors. This is another similar issue that I ran into. Like I said, the geodetic survey county boundaries are the foundation of this data set. They're considered authoritative. However, data that was downloaded from a county may show the county boundaries to be different from what the geodetic survey shows. And then that data may also conflict with data from another county. The map here shows what this looks like on the border between Mecklenburg and Union County. Now, I do want to say I didn't choose this example in order to pick on anyone or to assign blame, just trying to illustrate this point. And I completely understand that this can be difficult to manage from the county GIS staff perspective as well. There are so many factors that they have to consider. There's a lot that they have to deal with. So again, not trying to point anyone out, so to speak. But this map shows in hatches the so as you can see, the county data overlaps the geodetic survey data. There are places where it falls short of the geodetic survey data, and then places where the 2 counties' data overlaps each other or there are gaps between them. So this is just one thing that I had to sort of think through and make sense of as I was working through the data. I also ran into these areas that some people might call slivers. So these are areas that are technically part of a polygon, but they're greatly separated from the bulk of the polygon. This is an example in Hope County. You can see that I've highlighted I've selected the Hope County polygon, or areas that are only meant to be within the Hope County boundary. So that includes the large area in the southern half of the county, but also you can sort of see in bright blue the areas that are highlighted along the northern boundary. So this happened because as I said, it includes more than 2,300 individual polygons, as well as 42 fields in the attribute table. And about 18 of those are considered required. So we'll do our best to have values included for every single polygon in those particular fields. So that includes the name of the county that it's contained in, where it came from, the source, the FIPS codes, and other information like that. Those are the required fields. Now, there's still some things that need to be worked out with the data set before it can be released. We still need to fill in some attributes within those required fields. Some of the more egregious slivers will need to be likely resolved. And then we may need to make sure that the proper airports and military installations are included. At the moment, the only airport included is RDU, which reflects the 2014 data set. So we'll have to figure out if that's the best way to do things with respect to the airports, since there are obviously many more airports all around the state. Now, after we at NCEM have completed quality control, we will hand this off to the Secretary of State's office. They're going to review it and then send it out to the counties and cities for them to review. So in the future, once we have a finalized data set, that data set will be updated with materials that are sent to the Secretary of State's office. So that information will then go from the state to the census, whereas before, from what I understand, changes were coming from the census to the state. So that's a difference in the future. Now, there will be another part of this project which will deal with city and town annexations in more detail. So over the next several months, there will be a pilot project for counties to submit their annexations. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, I would encourage you to contact one of the people listed on this slide. So that includes Colleen Kiley from NCDIT, Bob Coates from the Office of State Budget and Management, or John Bridgers, who's in the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. I believe that's all I have for this presentation, but I'd be happy to answer questions. I'll try to pull up the chat. Okay, I don't see any there, but if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to go through those. I just saw a question from David Mathern. Will this be a public data set? And if so, where would it be hosted? That's a good question. It will be a public data set once it has been verified. As to where it'll be hosted, I don't know. I would assume that we would go through the normal channels, such as, NC1 map, some of the other maybe publicly available data hosts for GIS data in North Carolina. But I don't have an official answer for that, so I apologize. Let's see, from Todd, what do you think the timing will be like on redistricting? Well, if you're referring to the congressional redistricting, I don't have a good answer for that. And I don't think this would entirely relate to that. As far as updating making updates to this data set, I'm going to try to do that in real time. As updates are made by cities and counties, we will try to update this data set and then make that updated data set available in all of those public data hosting sites. So we'll try to do it as often as I can, so that it remains up to date, and we don't run into another situation where the data that's most up to date is actually from 2014. So we're going to try to stay on top of it. Kevin, it looks like that question was answered by Richard. Richard may know more about that question than I do. I am I'm somewhat new to some of these concepts, so I appreciate people who know more about annexations and city ordinances and all of that.
Yeah. If there's no further questions, I'll just add my voice to the chorus of people in the chat saying, great job, Alan. This was really informative presentation, and look forward to working with this data set once it's out
Great.
there.
Certainly.
And I guess
I just wanted to comment on what Jess Weiss possibly has said in the chat. Resolving all these sources can be a headache. It was difficult at times to go through and try to figure out what came from where and try to include that in the attribute table for each polygon. However, I'm hopeful that when the data is sent back out to the cities and counties, that they'll be able to make any corrections, to give their input, say yay or nay, provide any updates that have happened since the data set was put together. Did you find much metadata on the boundaries from each source? I did in some places. It just sort of varied from county to county. There were some counties that I would say most counties did a great job of making things available and giving information. But there were some places where it was just sort of a basic shapefile with the boundaries and not a whole lot of attributes, which is fine. And, I don't expect everyone to provide me with a ton of information. Yeah, I just, like I said, I just try to use whatever I can find. So again, I'm hopeful that the counties and cities can resolve any errors that I might have made or any points of confusion. As you were watching me go through this presentation, there might have been a couple of places where you had questions or maybe had issues with how it was put together. So I'm hopeful that the counties, as this is a collaborative process, that we can all put something together that reflects what is most, what is accurate as it can possibly be.
Well, I suppose it's my job to thank everyone for coming out to this presentation and remind you all to, there's the exit poll. So fill that out before you leave. And yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Alan.
Great, thank you.